When I stood up for an intern being bullied by our boss, I thought I was doing the right thing. Instead, I got fired, blacklisted in the industry, and labeled a troublemaker. While Carter, the man who abused his power, kept his job, his smug smile, and his spotless reputation. I was devastated, but I wasn't done. They thought they could silence me. They thought they could erase me. So I made sure my fall would be the reason they all came crashing down. My name is Adam Wilkes, and for most of my adult life, I believed in the system. I worked in human resources, not exactly a glamorous job, but one that mattered, at least to me. I liked being the guy people came to when something went wrong. I believed in policy, fairness, and that HR could be a shield for the people, not just a tool for management. I started working at Darrow Logistics 5 years ago. Medium-sized company, family-run, mostly warehouse operations, supply chain services, and a small but growing HR department. Nothing fancy, but I made it work. I was diligent, detail-oriented, and a bit of a stickler for procedure. I earned a reputation as the guy who always followed the rules, no exceptions. And that's how I ended up on Carter's radar. James Carter was the VP of operations, but everyone knew he was more than that. He was the founder's son-in-law, the de facto power broker of the company. Whatever Carter said went. He could reassign people without HR clearance. He could override budget approvals. He ran the warehouse like his personal kingdom, and nobody questioned him, not if they wanted to keep their job. I tried to keep my distance. I didn't like how he talked to the female staff, how his jokes always crossed the line. I didn't like how he gave promotions to his drinking buddies, or how he dismissed safety complaints like they were personal insults. But he was upper management. I wasn't stupid. Then came Emma. Emma was an intern, young, fresh out of college, eager to prove herself. She was assigned to the operations team, reporting directly to Carter. Within 2 weeks, she was a wreck. I noticed it during one of our mandatory HR check-ins. She couldn't make eye contact. Her answers were clipped. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. When I gently asked if everything was okay, she smiled, this brittle practice thing that didn't reach her eyes, and said she was just adjusting to the pace. I let it go at first. I told myself she just needed time, that she'd speak up if something was wrong. But she didn't, and things got worse. I started hearing whispers, other interns complaining that Emma was getting singled out, being made to stay late without overtime, getting assigned degrading tasks like cleaning out storage closets or running errands unrelated to her job. Carter called it character building. Everyone else called it harassment. Then, someone forwarded me an email. It was from Carter to Emma. One sentence, no subject line. Smile more. You're here to learn, not mope. I felt something turn in my gut, so I scheduled a private conversation with Emma. I told her it would be off the record. I promised her no pressure, just a safe space. That's when she broke down, not sobbing, not a breakdown, just quiet, exhausted surrender. She told me about the comments Carter made, about how he'd lean too close when he talked to her, about the late nights, the thinly veiled threats, the constant criticism, and worst of all, how powerless she felt to stop any of it. I listened. I took notes, and then I asked the question that changed everything. Do you want to file a formal complaint? She hesitated, then nodded. I explained the process. I was honest it wouldn't be easy. Carter was well protected. But if she was willing to put it on paper, I would make sure it was investigated. She agreed. I filed the report the next morning. Less than 24 hours later, I was called into Carter's office. I hear you've been poking around where you shouldn't, Adam. I'm doing my job, I replied. No. You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. You HR types forget your place sometimes. This isn't college. This is the real world. People like Emma. They're here to learn not to cry, Wolf. I didn't back down. I told him the report was submitted and that our internal ethics policy required a full review. That's when his tone shifted less threatening, more amused. You think this company runs on policy? You think some intern sob story is going to change how things work around here? If there's been misconduct, there hasn't. But let me give you a little advice, Adam. Adam, if you want to keep your job, learn to stay out of grown-up business. That was the last conversation we ever had. 3 days later, I received a formal notice of termination. The reason: performance inconsistencies and violation of internal protocol. No warning, no review, no HR panel. Just like that, I was out. And Emma, she never came back. After I was fired, I sat in my apartment, staring at the termination letter for what felt like hours. I read it again and again, trying to convince myself there had to be a mistake. Performance inconsistencies. I had spotless reviews. Violation of internal protocol. I followed every step in the handbook. I wrote half of that handbook. It wasn't just the firing, it was the silence. No one from the office called. Not even a goodbye email. HR had always been my department, my people. Now, it was like I'd never existed. I was scrubbed from the system overnight. And Carter. He didn't just win, he erased me. I tried to move on. I updated my resume, applied to jobs, went to interviews. But something strange started happening. I'd get through the first round, sometimes even the second. Then radio silence. Or polite rejections with vague explanations. One recruiter finally let something slip. We were ready to move forward, but there's chatter. Some concerns about you being a liability. A liability. It hit me like a punch. Carter had blacklisted me. In our industry, especially in HR circles, reputation was everything. A whisper in the right ear could kill your chances at 10 companies before you even got to the interview. Carter had connections, probably fed them some version of the story, where I was the disgruntled employee who tried to weaponize the HR system. Maybe even implied I falsified the report. Whatever the story was, it stuck. Within 3 months, my savings were nearly gone. I was picking up gig work, editing resumes, temp jobs, freelance policy reviews for small firms who didn't know or care about corporate gossip. It paid just enough to keep me afloat, but not enough to feel human. I started doubting myself. Maybe I had been naive. Maybe I should have kept my head down, played it safe. Maybe helping Emma was the mistake. And then one night, I got a message. It was from a burner email. No name, no subject, just a screenshot. It was Carter again. This time, with a different intern. Same condescending tone, same cruel language. The message read, "You're not special. You're replaceable. Get it together or get out." My stomach turned. Attached was another message. "This one to me, I saw what you tried to do. I didn't say anything before, but you were right. He's still doing it. Worse now." I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't just Emma. It wasn't just a one-off situation. Carter had a pattern. Carter and the company, they were letting it happen, covering it up. That night, I opened a spreadsheet. I titled it Names. I listed Emma's, then the anonymous tipster, then 2 other interns I vaguely remembered, both of whom had left abruptly, no explanations. I started digging. LinkedIn, old office Slack messages, archived HR surveys. I reached out cautiously. Some didn't reply. Others denied everything. But a few didn't. One former employee, a warehouse manager, agreed to talk on the phone. She told me Carter screamed at her in front of her team, that he made her redo reports for hours just to humiliate her. When she complained, she was told to toughen up or leave. She left. Another woman, an ex-admin, sent me an old audio recording Carter calling her incompetent and useless during a staff meeting. Her voice shook as she described how that day ended, with her sobbing in her car, wondering if she should quit or drive straight into traffic. That broke me. This wasn't about my job anymore, or my reputation. This was about stopping him, about making sure no one else got chewed up and spit out just for trying to work. But I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I found someone who could help. Her name was Mia Contreras, a labor attorney known for handling class action harassment cases. I'd met her once during a compliance seminar and remembered her as sharp, relentless, and unafraid of corporate walls. I reached out, half expecting no reply. She responded within an hour. We met the next day. I showed her everything: emails, notes, recordings, screenshots, the names. She didn't blink once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is bigger than one guy. We're talking systemic abuse, negligence, retaliation. If we can get enough of these victims to come forward, we've got a case." That was the first moment in months I felt hope. But hope is dangerous because it means you're preparing for a fight, a real one. And I knew Carter wouldn't go down without dragging everyone with him. Mia didn't waste time. Within a week, she had assembled a small team of legal aides and began formal interviews with the people I'd contacted. She coached me on what questions to ask, how to approach former employees, and what kind of evidence could stand up in court. The first challenge was trust. Many people were scared. Some had signed NDAs, others feared retaliation, and a few were just emotionally exhausted from what they went through. But little by little, stories began to surface. A former finance associate described Carter screaming at her in the middle of an open office, then accusing her of incompetence in an email that was CC'd to the entire department. She left the company 2 months later and had been in therapy ever since. A former warehouse supervisor told us Carter made racist jokes in meetings, referring to some of the immigrant staff as liabilities. He had recordings, crackly, low-quality audio, taken with a phone in his jacket pocket. But the words were clear. Another intern, Emily, said Carter had touched her inappropriately at a holiday party. She never reported it. She was 19. We created aliases for each of them, carefully redacted identifying information, and compiled over 70 pages of testimonial evidence. Mia said we were building what lawyers call a pattern of behavior. The more consistent and varied the complaints were, the harder it would be for the company to deny knowledge or paint them as isolated events. But we still needed something more. A trigger, a smoking gun. Then it came by accident. One of the junior IT guys from Darrow, a soft-spoken guy named Neil, messaged me late one night. He said he remembered me from orientation, that I seemed like the only person in HR who actually gave a damn. He told me he still worked there, and he had access to archived internal communications, emails, Slack messages, server logs. He'd been watching Carter's behavior for a while and said he had a bad feeling about him, always had. "If I pull something and send it to you," Neil asked, "you won't say where it came from, right?" "Not even under oath," I promised. 2 days later, he sent me a zip file. Inside were dozens of internal messages, some from Carter, some between other managers discussing complaints like they were jokes. One HR manager, in a private message to Carter, wrote another intern crying harassment. "That's the third this quarter. Must be something in the coffee." Carter replied, "Tell them we'll look into it." then bury it. Standard. Another message showed Carter bragging about scaring off the little whistleblower after my firing. My name was in it, in plain text. This was it. Evidence not just of misconduct, but of conscious cover-up. Mia's eyes lit up when I showed her. This isn't just harassment, she said. This is retaliation, negligence, corporate conspiracy. This is a class action waiting to happen. We filed the initial legal complaint within the month. It wasn't public yet. Just the first formal step. But Carter must have caught wind, because the next thing I knew, my name popped up on an anonymous corporate blog accusing me of orchestrating a smear campaign for money. No author, no citations, just vague innuendo. The story spread like wildfire in the logistics HR community. I started getting hate mail. One message said, "You're what's wrong with men today, playing the victim for clout." Another accused me of destroying careers out of bitterness, but something else happened too. More people came forward. One by one, women and men from Darrow, some former, some still employed, messaged me. They thanked me. They told me I wasn't imagining it, that they'd suffered too, that they were ready to talk. Our plaintiff list grew from 5 to 15 to 24. One of them, a man named Marcus, had tried to report Carter 3 years ago and was demoted for insubordination. He showed us a copy of his report time-stamped and signed that had been lost by HR. The company never responded to it. Another woman, Dana, revealed she had been forced to sign an NDA after reporting Carter's misconduct, but her lawyer found a loophole in the language. She recorded a deposition in Mia's office, and by the end of it, Mia said, "They've been plugging holes in a sinking ship for years. This isn't just going to sink Carter, it's going to take down the whole damn department." Still, the stress was taking a toll on me. Some nights, I'd stare at my phone wondering if I was doing the right thing. My savings were gone. I was working part-time at a staffing agency during the day and helping Mia at night. My personal relationships strained. I'd grown isolated, obsessed. My family worried. My sister asked if maybe I was going too far. But then I'd read another testimony, another story of someone broken by that man. And I'd remember this wasn't revenge. This was justice. And then it happened. Someone leaked the lawsuit. We don't know who. Might have been one of the plaintiffs. Might have been someone at the courthouse. But once it was public, it exploded. Within 24 hours, a reporter from a major business magazine called me. Then another from a podcast. Then a YouTuber who covered workplace abuse stories reached out and asked if I'd share my story anonymously. Mia advised caution, but she also said this was a powerful opportunity. So, we made a decision. We published a post on LinkedIn. Short, simple. I was fired for reporting harassment. I thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. We attached no names, no accusations, just a link to the official legal filing. It went viral. Over 100,000 views in a week. Dozens of comments from strangers, some sharing their own horror stories, some simply saying thank you. Carter stayed quiet, but Darrow released a generic PR statement. "We take all allegations seriously and are committed to maintaining a safe, respectful workplace." The internet wasn't buying it. A few days later, a second lawsuit appeared, this time from a former female executive who claimed she was forced out after objecting to Carter's promotion. She didn't know about our case, but once she did, she joined. Then came the news I never expected: Carter was suspended, pending internal investigation. Darrow had no choice. Investors were spooked. A major client pulled their contract, citing ethics concerns. Shareholders demanded transparency. HR managers started resigning. One even called me, to ask if I'd be open to consulting on rebuilding the department. I hung up, not out of spite, but because this wasn't over yet. We were heading to trial. The company offered a settlement, but Mia rejected it. She said they want to sweep this under the rug. I say we ripped the rug off the floor. It was risky, but we were ready. 27 plaintiffs, dozens of testimonies, documents, audio, emails, evidence that painted a damning picture, not just of one man, but of a system that protected him for years. In court, Carter looked smaller than I remembered. Nervous. Defensive. The arrogant smile was gone. He denied everything, of course. Claimed it was all exaggeration. That his words were taken out of context. But the jury didn't buy it, especially after Emma testified. Yes, Emma, she found her voice. And when she stood in front of that courtroom voice, shaking but steady, and told her story, the room went silent. And when she pointed at Carter and said, "He made me feel like I didn't matter. But I do. We all do." The silence cracked into something bigger. The courtroom buzzed with a tension I could almost taste. After Emma's testimony, the atmosphere changed. The defense team looked rattled. Jurors leaned forward in their seats. And for the first time since the proceedings began, Carter didn't meet anyone's eyes. But we weren't done. Mia called one final witness. It was Neil, the quiet itty guy, the one who had taken the biggest risk by sharing the internal communications. He had been subpoenaed anonymously until now, but when the judge allowed his identity to be revealed, he stepped forward willingly. He testified that he'd been concerned for years, but feared retaliation. When he saw what happened to me, and later how others were being smeared online, he realized staying silent made him complicit. He handed over digital records, including metadata, timestamps, and logs proving those messages were genuine and unaltered. Then came the moment that stunned even me. Mia revealed a hidden email thread from 2 years prior. In it, Carter discussed restructuring HR to eliminate whistleblowers. He had specifically named me and 2 other employees who had later mysteriously resigned. The email's subject line, "Silence is strategic." That line would later headline 3 different news articles. The jury took 2 days to deliberate. 2 excruciating days. I walked around the city, unable to sleep. I kept imagining the worst, that Carter would walk, that the company would settle, that the machine would keep grinding on, unchanged. But when the verdict came, I knew from the first word on the judge's face, guilty. Guilty of wrongful termination. Guilty of fostering a hostile work environment. Guilty of retaliation. The company was held liable for negligence cover-up and systemic abuse of power. Carter was fired that same day. But the real twist: 2 more companies he was advising also cut ties with him within 24 hours. One board issued a public statement. "We were unaware of Mr. Carter's conduct and condemn all forms of workplace harassment." His LinkedIn disappeared. His personal website went offline. And then his name was listed in a public industry blacklist created by survivors of corporate abuse. A quiet collective act of reckoning. The civil penalties were enormous. Millions in damages awarded. The court mandated the company overhaul its HR systems, bring in outside monitors, and undergo regular audits. 3 executives resigned. I didn't take a victory lap. I didn't gloat. I went home, sat on my couch, and cried. But not from sadness. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. A few weeks later, I got an email from a major international firm. They'd followed the case, One of their executives had read my testimony and wanted to meet. I flew out to Chicago thinking it was a long shot, but they offered me a job, Director of People and Culture, a role designed to help shape safer, fairer workplaces. They wanted someone who didn't just know HR, but lived it. I said yes, and I brought Emma with me as our first new hire. On my first day, the CEO introduced me to the team. He said Adam's story reminded us that silence is never strategic. Integrity is. I still remember how those words made my chest tighten, because for so long I thought doing the right thing had destroyed my life. Turns out it rebuilt it. My new company brought a huge change to my life. I could laugh again without feeling guilty. I no longer had to hide in the shadows, fearing that I'd be exposed as a troublemaker like before. Everything had changed, and I knew I had played a part. On my first day at the new office, I stood in front of the whiteboard in the meeting room, facing a group of passionate and eager employees. They looked at me with admiration, as if I were some kind of hero. But I won for all the people who had stood up, those who no longer feared seeing their own pain reflected in someone else's. And it was because every time I saw Emma smile in the office, I remembered the day she stood up in court and spoke the truth. I felt like I was no longer alone, and I thought we all have the power to make a difference. Carter was ousted from the industry, but I didn't feel satisfaction, because I knew that his greatest punishment wasn't losing his job, but living with the shadow he had cast on H. Looking back at everything that had happened, I understood that sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's the only path that leads to freedom and respect. I was no low, and I knew that in this work, I could truly make a difference. End of the story. Thank you for following Adam's journey.